Hello, beautiful lights, and welcome to another episode of From a Medium's Perspective. Today, I'm being joined by shamanic healer and journeyer and teacher of all interesting things, life coach and author, Linda Ferguson. Welcome, Linda. Happy to have you here.
It's great to be here with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Would you take a minute and tell our listeners the names of each of the books that you have written?
My first book was called Path for Greatness, Work as Spiritual Service. And my second book is called Staying Grounded in Shifting Sand. And it has to do with healing and conscious awareness in the new millennium.
And if our listeners wanted to reach you, what is the best contact that you would prefer?
They can email me directly at info, I-N-F-O, at Linda, L-I-N-D-A, the letter J, Ferguson, Ferguson.com. And my website is lindajferguson.com.
Oh, thank you so much. Sometimes people like to listen in, kind of check people out during the show, so that lets them spy on you while we're here. So you've been on our show before, and that was an amazing, very profound session. And I'm so happy to have you. Don't laugh. It's true. It was. It really,
oh, gosh. Shucks.
I cried, so it was good. In a good way. So it was awesome. But we decided that maybe we would talk a little bit about shamanic healing and shamanic journeying today. First of all, can you tell us what that is? Some of our listeners are kind of opening their gifts and learning new things and curious. So tell us what a shaman is and then what shamanic healing and journeying are.
Big question. I'll just try to answer it really simply and say that there are many shamanic traditions, whether it's from the eastern Mongolian, Siberian area to the Central and South American to North American to Celtic to African to the Aboriginal. So there's just so many different ways that we can think about shamanism. And I also just want to really preface to say that I don't consider myself to be a shaman per se, but I do shamanic practice such as shamanic journeys and do some shamanic healing work. So what shamanic journeys are is our ability to journey to different spirit realms. We typically think of the spirit realms as being three, the lower, the middle, and the upper realm. Those are sort of the three standard ones that we can go to. And then shamanic healing is kind of in a very broad way is our ability to work with spirit guides. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But our ability to work with spirit guides who are in the non-physical to do the healing work that needs to happen in the 3D physical world.
Yeah, I appreciate the difference between being a shaman and using shamanic practices. How would you differentiate? What makes somebody AKA a shaman? I've heard that if you call yourself one, it's like not cool, but if other people do, it's okay. How would you differentiate the two?
Well, most people who would call themselves or be considered shamans, many of them in the indigenous cultures would have been identified at a very young age, and they would have been groomed and trained over many, many years. One of the medicine men that I heard some years ago spoke in just this wonderful way about his training as a young boy with the native elder of his tribe. And he was saying that, as a kid, he didn't want to do all this shamanic stuff. He wanted to be out there playing with his friends, and it was a real struggle for him. But as he became an adult, he realized why he had to go through so many years of training. But the phrase that he used that I've used many times since then when I've talked to people about doing this shamanic healing work is he had to become, and I love this phrase, he had to become a hollow bone through which spirit may blow.
Oh, a hollow bone through which spirit may blow. That's interesting because as a psychic medium, I sometimes use the term fiber optic cable or something, or sometimes the old school telephone operator.
Yeah. So the Native American is the hollow bone. The reason why I like that sort of definition, or the way that we can think about doing the kind of shamanic healing that we do, is that we have to be this hollow bone. We have to be so hollowed out of our own stuff that if we have any baggage, just day-to-day kind of crap, we have to release that. Because in order for spirit to work through us, we have to be such a clear conduit that it's not our stuff that's getting transmitted, but it's truly we're this hollow bone. And so it takes years and years and years to get out of your own way. It takes years and years and years to clean out our own crap, our own baggage, all the woundedness that we may have experienced in our lifetime, to truly be able to be in that place and that awareness and hold the vibrational energy of spirit, of this higher order power that's coming through us. And that's vitally important for anybody who's going to be any kind of a healer, really any kind of a healer, but particularly in the shamanic and in the spirit realm of doing healing. We have to be that hollow bone so that it's not our stuff or our agenda, knowing that we're tapping into a much, much higher power that's working through us.
Yeah, that is how I think of psychic development or mediumship development also. We talk a lot about ego, like, ooh, I'm going to be famous or whatever. And we all know that's probably not a good thing to carry around. But putting your intellect down, your knowledge, your perceptions, your preconceived ideas,
Yep.
and being able to set those aside so that you can receive pure information. And also sometimes because it comes through our subconscious, it might not even make sense to us. Some messages that I get for people, I'll say, does that resonate with you? Or do you understand why they would say that? And they'll be just like blown away because it's some vital piece of information. But to me, I might have just said the word Ambien or quoted something or said something about, I don't know, I'm seeing a bunch of roses, and they're like, oh, that's my family name. It's that detachment from what we know so that we can connect.
In fact, as I was prepping for this, I know you like to have examples. So one example, when I was working with one of my clients who was really struggling some stuff, I was working with the midsection, kind of around the third chakra, and could really feel a lot of pain and really feel a lot of resentment, actually, was what I was feeling. And so as I was kind of clearing that and opening that out, I saw this blue and white apron. It was like this very random
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I get a random image, I know there's something going on.
Yeah, it's got to be something juicy.
I have no idea what this is. So at the end of it, as we do our debrief, which I always do with my clients, I mentioned, I was clearing out this resentments and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I saw this blue and white apron. Does that mean anything to you? And she just looked at me. Her eyes got really big. She said, my grandmother always wore this blue and white apron, and I have so much resentments towards my mother. And I feel like that was my grandmother saying to let it go.
How beautiful.
Now I would have never come up with that. I had no idea what was going on for her, and I certainly wouldn't have known about this blue and white apron.
Right.
That's what happens, and that's just kind of an example, and I know we're going to go into more of when I'm doing the healing work. I'll get these, images or messages or physical sensations. That's where I know that something's moving through me or something's coming through that I need to do or share or work on in some kind of way.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the realms, lower, middle, and upper realm. Tell us just a bit about what that symbolizes or represents or is.
Sure. We can certainly go there in shamanic journeys. As I do my healing, sometimes I'll go there as well. Basically, the idea is that we live in this 3D world. We got our physical body. We've got all the 3D things that we're dealing with, our car and our home and all that. And so the healing work, when we do that, is we go into this other spirit realm. We travel, if you will. Certainly I do when I'm powering up and I'm in my shamanic healing presence. I go with one of my guides to one of these realms. So the middle realm represents kind of like a parallel world to our 3D world, but it's spirit world, where there are trees and rocks and things that we may need to encounter that would parallel our earth realm. And yet we can work with the trees, the stone people, the river people, the spirit guides in that middle realm as it might relate to something going on in our physical 3D world.
Would you consider them like the elementals or,
yes,
totems maybe would come from that realm?
So the elementals could be either in the middle realm or in the lower realm. I tend to think of the elementals more in the lower realm. So the lower realm is where we're going down into the earth. And so as we go into the earth, that's when we can connect up with the spirit guides, the elementals, the fairy folk and whatnot who are down in the earth. We tend to access them there because the fairy folk often and the elementals don't want to kind of appear on the physical plane in the middle realm so much.
Kind of hidden behind the fabric.
Yeah.
Yes.
I personally tend to connect with them when I'm doing work in the lower realm. In fact, I just led a 4-part program on working with these 3 different spirit realms, and I made a really clear distinction between the lower realm and the underworld. And I think that's an important distinction because the underworld, a lot of people fear and they think of it as death and destruction. And then all the stuff they may have gotten from their childhood upbringing about devil and Satan and that kind of stuff. I mean, I just don't even go there. It's like the lower world is where we go into the earth. We go down under, and we can connect there with, as I mentioned, sort of the elemental kingdom. We can connect with the ancestors, but I talk about it as the ancestors, meaning we can connect there with the elders and the ancestors who have come before us, even if they're not our specific biological ancestors, but it's the ancestors. So we can connect with ancient wisdom as we're doing this work in the inner world. And then upper world is where we connect in the ways that I generally work with the sky beings, the celestial beings, the angelic realm, kind of the higher order frequency that we might get from higher dimensions. So that typically is work that we do in the guides that we connect with in the upper realm.
Sort of like ascended masters and gods and goddesses and angels and things. So in the middle realm, do you identify any particular guide?
I will often work with totem animals in the middle realm. They're powerful guides for me as I'm doing work in the middle realm. For me, it's generally nature-based. As I mentioned, like the stone people and the river creatures and the animals, the beings who might, quote-unquote, walk on the earth. It's happening in the spirit realm.
Yes, it's a parallel, I don't know if we would call it dimension.
I suppose you could think of it as another dimension. It's a spirit dimension.
Yeah, that dimension that our clairvoyance and clairaudience and all those gifts. Actually, I don't even like calling them gifts because I think everyone can do them. So, you know, with practice. I guess one of the questions you probably get pretty often is this real?
Yeah, well, for sure when I do journeys, newcomers, that's usually the first question that they ask. You know, I was the same way. I was struggling and questioned that one for many years before I felt comfortable even doing this kind of work. Of course, my first question, which is what most people ask, is, am I just making this up? And the answer,
get the same question.
Yeah, you know.
No.
Yeah, and I kind of like how Sandra Ingerman, who's a really major shamanic teacher, well, she travels over the world, but certainly in the U.S., which is that, you know, we use our imagination often to connect with the spirit world. And so it's kind of the doorway that we have to enter through as we're doing this kind of work. So whether you're, quote unquote, making it up or whether you're using your imagination as that doorway, you have to learn to push past the doubt to get to where you're able to receive the answers that you can then start to trust.
I wonder if imagination then is that moment or that point at which we let go of our preconceived ideas, you know, where we sort of start daydreaming. Sort of like looking at the clouds and seeing shapes.
You know? Yeah, lots of forms of divination happen that way for
yes,
sure.
Yeah.
So, and I also talk on that related note when my clients and people who work with me ask that question about is it real or am I imagining it? I will usually say, well, when we're doing this work, we're setting the intention that the right highest good is done.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And so even if you're imagining it, quote unquote, and it's not quote unquote real, you're still tapping into then your inner wisdom in some way that those thoughts and images are coming up. So accept that as the message, even if it's coming from you.
Yeah, and there's that issue of images, you know, that's one of the ways that spirit communicates with us or that other dimension becomes real for us is through the symbols in talking to guides of people, etc. I don't think that they necessarily care what we call them. You know what I mean? But I think that there is a particular vibration that people relate to. And I always find it fascinating when I find somebody and maybe I do pick up the name of that guide or I do pick up the description of that guide and they say someone else had told them, or they knew that guide, or when I give them that information and they go to someone else and they come back and go, oh my God, so and so saw such and such around me too. It's a
Yeah.
great validation because it comes through common experience, common
Right.
perception. I guess we feel sort of safer in that herd mentality.
Yeah, well, I was going to share actually two stories right on that note. In one healing session, I was working with a guy. Well, I won't really say what exactly the nature of the work was, but about halfway through it, I felt this very distinct physical presence of a guide, of somebody standing next to me. And it definitely felt like a grandfather, and it definitely felt like it was a Native American. You were talking about physical sensations. I mean, I could tell if there's a guide standing next to me. I mean, the
Yes, we
physical
sense it.
sensation
We
is so
sense it.
distinct.
Yes.
So afterwards, during the debrief, as I was sharing different things that I was doing, I was like, do you have Native American lineage? The guy looked, he was kind of like a Creole, kind of African American. I could tell there was sort of mixed lineage with this physical appearance. I said, do you happen to have a Native American? He said, well, yeah, my grandfather was. And he then starts to describe his grandfather. I said, well, is he in spirit? And he says, yeah, he died when I was 10 years old. I said, well, boy, he was with me in a big way. I mean, and as soon as I started talking about some of the things I saw, he said, oh, yeah, that would have been my grandfather.
Cool.
I had a very physical sensation and had no idea what his lineage was or anything like that. And then just recently, I was working with a woman who had talked to me a little bit about a spirit guide that she worked with. She didn't describe it. She just said, yeah, I have a spirit guide. I said, okay. So as I was doing some work with her, I mean, almost from the time I started using my drum, sort of setting the energetic container, I felt this very distinct Native American male presence. It was really powerful. And as I was doing the work with her, again, I felt this presence was there and doing some work with me. So afterwards, I described what this presence was. And she says, oh, yeah, that's what so-and-so said that my spirit guide was like. I know when I'm working with somebody else's guide or an ancestor or someone who's coming sort of through me for them, it's a very distinct physical sensation.
Yeah, people ask me, and I'm sure you too, do you see them? And there are times when I do. I would say that it's so physical that I do see them, but it's not usually that way. And I kind of think of it as you said you felt, and then you started to describe what you were feeling, which is very empathic. It's sort of clairvoyant too, because the great example would be if somebody comes into the room and you're familiar with them or not, you can kind of sense, even if they come in behind you, you can sense their intent. Sometimes if they're male or female, they're in your family, you can identify them, whether or not you can smell, hear, there's no indication physically. They come up behind you, you can feel that. And the images, I think of it as sort of like the way that if you play a memory, a scene of a memory on your mind, those pictures are projected on that screen. And they may not be on that screen, but they have that feeling of like seeing them. Anyway.
What I'm doing today, I couldn't have done and I didn't do 5 years ago. I mean, it was very much me continually practicing it, doing it, so that now, like I say, sometimes just the moment I pick up my drum and I start drumming, boom, I get this sense of it. So it very much takes practice. And being the hollow bone, clearing out our stuff. It's both our releasing anything that's going to block us and also kind of activating and elevating our awareness and our connection to spirit. Doing both of those over time, absolutely, I believe people can develop their gifts and abilities to do this.
Oh, yes, definitely. I was just doing the Just Bernard show right before this one, and I was talking about you are psychic too, and talking about memories of growing up. We sometimes don't even recognize that what we are experiencing is extraordinary, that it is that indicator or connection with the other side. C.W. Ledbetter is turn of the century, as in late 1800s to 1900s writer, and he talks about spontaneous clairvoyance, which is when the spirit themselves is more dominant in their need to be seen and heard. And it doesn't mean you're a medium to see them, because pretty much anyone in that space would sense, see, or feel them. But as you discipline and develop bridging the gap, mediumship, shamanic visioning, etc., you are able to better control your ability to drop what you expect and realize that the information isn't going to come from you anyway. So you might as well kick back and enjoy the ride and just be attentive to what you see.
Yeah, for sure.
Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Well, I guess just to say that spirit guides could be anyone or anything. You know, we talked about totem animals, we talked about the ancestors, we talked about the angelic realm. So it could be a person that you know. It could just simply be a guide in the form of a person, even though you've never seen or experienced that person. It definitely could be an animal. Sometimes when I do shamanic journeys and I say, you know, your guide's showing up or whatever we may be doing, they might see a color. And so the spirit guide may show up as a color. Actually, just the last journey that I did, we were working with the upper realm, and this woman talked about hearing a hum. And sometimes in the angelic realm, in the upper world, you might hear a hum or a tune or a ringing or
a particular vibration. Yes.
Yeah, a sound.
A sound.
Yeah. The spirit guides are going to present themselves in any number of ways. So it doesn't have to be a person. It doesn't have to look like a person. And it doesn't have to have an actual physical appearance.
Yes.
As we were just describing, sometimes to me it's just a vibrational sensation or feeling rather than an image.
Yeah, and I think that our guides can transform the way they show us. I have a guide rising sun who's Native American, but when he shows up, there's this particular color red. So it's like the shorthand. You know, I know it's him. If I were to focus, I would see his physical being. And I really like that you created these differentiated categories, because a lot of times it seems to me that people confuse ancestors with angels, with guides at large. And that kind of disturbs me because I'm technical, because, you know, I'm very precise, and I love the diversity of categories, because each is individual and each has its own particular vibration. And I had never thought about them particularly connected to different realms. I think if you had asked me, I might have raised my hand this high, that high, that high when we were talking about the different categories, but I never attached them in my mind with realms. I find that very fascinating.
Yeah. Well, one other piece that I also want to mention that would be, I don't know if it's unique necessarily to shamans, but we definitely also work with the elements. So earth, air, fire, and water. So calling on water energy for cleansing and clearing, calling on fire to burn and disintegrate or release something through fire, calling on air to bring in sort of better flow or ease, or sometimes I'll use air as I'm trying to connect with the winged ones and greater vision. We'll use earth when we need more kind of solidness or understanding. The earth is under us. I work as well with the 4 elements. Not to be confused with the elementals, but the elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And that's very much a shamanic practice.
Oh, that's very interesting. And that crosses a lot of different religious practices, you know, paganism and Wicca and anything or any earth-based practice.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the shamans that I studied with, Peter Calhoun, fabulous guy. If anybody's interested in reading about him, he wrote a great book, Soul on Fire. Peter was an Episcopal priest for many years. And over the course of his being a priest, he encountered several shamans and medicine men and studied with them. And he just got to the point where the Christian faith and the Christian approach to things just couldn't do it anymore. And so he gave up, you know, stepped away from being a priest and stepped into being a shaman. And he shared a story about working with a shaman. I can't remember if it was a Cherokee or a Lakota, but he was studying with the shaman. I think Peter must have at that time still been connected to church, but he said, I'm so sorry that our tradition, ours meaning the Christian, that we don't have shamans. And the medicine man said to Peter, oh, you do, but you killed them. You burned them at the stake as witches.
Ah, yes. And we do have Christian mystics that exist too. If you'd like to reach Linda, you can find her at lindajferguson.com or info@lindajferguson.com. If you tuned in a little bit late or would like to listen to this episode again or would like to hear some of our past episodes, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you put in Medium Tracey Lockwood or From a Medium's Perspective, you'll find it. You can also find all of the shows listed on my webpage at mediumtraceylockwood.com. that's on the radio show / YouTube page. The ones over to the left on that page are for your hardcore psychic and mediumship development, and the ones in the middle are just topics of unusual interest, and the ones on the right are my guests. So feel free to check that out. If you'd like to, again, reach our guest, her name is Linda J. Ferguson, Ferguson, and you can find her at her website at lindaferguson.com. We were just talking about Peter Calhoun, who had written a book, Soul on Fire. Was he the one that you were talking about with his experience, Linda, that left? Was it the Catholic Church and came
Episcopal.
Episcopal
Yeah,
Church?
he was Episcopal priest.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I thought his Episcopalian efforts were for sure, like everyone in a religious field, based on a desire for connection with spirit. But sometimes the doctrine can kind of externalize our experience and then create sort of a critical lens through which we see the world. But as a shamanic practice, he would have been able to have a more experiential base to his efforts and internalize his experience. It's funny, when we internalize change, that's when we can make the biggest difference outside of ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you have anything further that you wanted to share on that? I didn't want to leave you hanging. We hit the break hard.
No. No, I was just trying to make the connection, because you had mentioned Wicca and pagan, and that there are shamans from many different cultures across the globe, and that there were people who were doing shamanic kinds of practice, obviously, in Europe and whatnot. But many of them, as I was just saying with this Peter Calhoun story, were deemed as witches, quote unquote. Obviously, that ran up against the church power structure. But the healing work that they did, and I guess this is kind of to come back around to the topic of the day, which is that people have been doing this kind of healing work, whether they've called themselves shamans or medicine men, medicine women, herbalists, whoever they might have called themselves, or maybe not even had a title for themselves, that doing this kind of work where we're working with the spirit realm. Maybe it's the devas of the plants, for instance. Maybe we're working with the fairy folk. We talked about them a little bit earlier. Or the non-seen world. That's been happening for centuries. And some are continuing to do that, and some have been killed off for doing it.
Yes. I was just trying to think. You had mentioned at the beginning of the show the different continents and countries that their traditions steeped in shamanic healing and work. And I don't think there's not a single culture that hasn't a history of that in some way, whether they are called shamans or mystics, or they're called psychics or mediums or whatever. Right. If you were to put it in comparison to energy healing, we hear a lot about Reiki and about Donna Eden energy medicine and all these different modalities. How would you compare it with that?
I do Reiki as well. So the main distinction is that with shamanic work, we are specifically working with the spirit realm. We're working with guides, totem animals, etc. Whereas with Reiki, I just open up and I'm just that channel of that energy. So in some of the energy traditions, you're not invoking a particular spirit guide to work through you. You're not calling in water, fire, whatever to help you do the clearing and the healing that you need to do. So that probably is the biggest difference. There are many, many energy healers, but they won't necessarily work with spirit guides to do it. That's what I would say would be a big difference. Now, given that, I know a lot of Reiki people who work with the angelic realm, but that's not pure Reiki. Reiki is opening up and allowing that universal flow of energy to move through us. It's not working with a specific guide or calling in or invoking another presence.
Would you say that's like trance healing, where you step aside? I don't think the shamanic healing would be, but do you think that Reiki would be more like trance healing in the sense that you just step aside? It's actually considered inappropriate to even figure out what's wrong with the person. You just kind of step back, open your flow, and boom.
That's certainly how I would describe Reiki. I'm not quite familiar with that word trance healing, although I get the general gist, but the way you've just described what that is definitely what I do when I do pure Reiki.
Yeah, so working with these energies, how does that go? Tell us either a story or take us that next step there.
You mean when I'm doing the shamanic healing?
Yes.
So I power up and I'm working with one of my main healing guides as I'm doing this, so that I'm always doing it in tandem with this one particular healing guide. So that's the first thing. That again would be the difference with Reiki. If I'm just doing Reiki, I'm just opening up and I'm not working specifically with a being. When I'm doing the shamanic healing, I'm very much opening up, calling in my spirit guide. I call the 4 directions. I set the container energetically for the work that we're going to do. I do the drumming and use the vibrations of the drum as well to help with the clearing. I allow any other guides that the person I'm working with, known or unknown, to come through to work with us. And that's what I was mentioning in that one story that, as soon as I started drumming, I felt the presence of this one spirit guide. I very intentionally call in the guides. And I always do everything with this phrase, may the right highest good be done. So I'm calling in those guides, those beings, the presence, the master teachers, the angelic realm. Whoever needs to be here. I work with the White Buffalo Calf Woman Clan, the White Light Brotherhood. So I just call in, I open up and say I'm ready to receive and work with whoever needs to work with me as I'm doing this. So when I'm with the person, I never know who or what will show up because I'm just allowing whatever's the right highest good to come through. So if St. Michael works through me, great. If St. Germain works through me, great. If some of my totem animals come and work with me, or if the client's spirit guides or an ancestor comes forward, I just take it knowing that whatever we're doing it for the right highest good for the healing of the person involved.
People that are the uninitiated or the unschooled in this arena often confuse, like in my case, they worry like, well, what's the difference between channeling and possession? And I think of possession as a hostile takeover and poor boundaries on the part of the person that is there. Whatever reason, maybe they've opened their portal because of alcohol or drugs, or they have emotionally degraded themselves or allowed life to wear on them to a point that their boundaries are just torn. They're filled with fear and other things. And channeling or speaking the words of the guides and angels and people around them is a higher vibrational thing, and that 2 vibrations cannot coexist. Do people worry that there might be something negative that would come in?
Yes, often. People do ask that question, is this dangerous? Is there a way that it's some kind of dark energy or negative energy can come through? And I always say that in my experience, when I'm doing this work, when I'm doing the journey work or the healing work, that doesn't come through. And I think it's because I'm holding the energetic vibration that's of such high form and I'm working with the guides that are doing this healing work. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think that principle that people might be familiar with, people that end up on a higher level or higher vibrational plane, sometimes they think about it as heaven being in different levels, that the beings that are at the higher level, because they are higher vibrational, just like any sound or light wave, they're able to travel down through and into the lower vibrational realms. But because of the weight and the lower vibrational state of the beings that are in the lower levels, they're not able to travel higher until they shift their perspective and are able to raise their vibration. That we talk a lot about raising our vibration.
Yeah, and anytime I do my work, I always prepare myself by raising my vibration, by grounding myself, by protecting myself. I do both a golden bubble around me as well as a blue. I carry a sacred stone that will help me both ground and protect myself. I definitely do a lot before I even see the client to help make sure that I'm in the right place energetically, that when I'm working with them, we're only bringing in that kind of energy as well. And I think that's very important, whether you're doing this work with others or whether you're doing it for yourself. That kind of preparation work is essential so that you're able to ground, you're able to anchor your energy, you're able to open up your energy to the higher vibrations, and you're able to protect yourself. And for me, again, this is just my experience. When I've done both the healing work and the journey work with people, we just don't encounter those.
When you start calling in those higher vibrations, I always invoke the protection of my guides and set the intent. There's nobody going to mess with you. Like the things that you mentioned about the stone and the things that you do to clear the atmosphere, those are your creating personal protections around. But once you start invoking the protection of your guides, they're going to hold fort and make sure nothing negative comes through. even when you're in a trance state and not able to focus on your auric bubble or whatever. I think people hear that term shamanic healing and they're not necessarily associating it with that's healing. That is in a physical impact. Have you seen physical things abated?
Oh, absolutely. Several stories I could share. One of them was I had a client who had sprained her ankle or done something with her foot, but she could barely walk on it. Just very, very painful. So she came in and we did some work, and I definitely cleared out something that was going on with her foot. And it was like this dark energy. We were talking earlier about, do people think that this work is dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. I will do a lot of clearing of dark energy.
You wouldn't have to take it away or like work with it to transmute it. I mean, you have to identify the problem to be able to address it. Whether you're consciously doing that or unconsciously, but there are those visual clues. And it's very interesting. I'm just more and more thinking of ourselves as these kind of protean clouds of light that get affected by things on the outside, and that kind of creates a depression. And I don't mean a depression within the person, although it can, but like an indentation or a darkness or a shadow on the outside of that. But that can be restored.
So I've done that. So that's a lot of what I do actually when I do my healing. So with this one woman in particular, and I can definitely share some other stories. I pulled out the dark energy. I was working with her foot. And in the debrief, we were talking a little bit about it. And I said, it seems like there's something that you've been standing on that has some kind of dark, I don't know if it's painful. I got the sense of grief or pain or suffering of some sort. And again, her eyes kind of went wide open. And she's like, oh my God. Where we're living, for the people on your radio show, I live in Northern Virginia area. Most of Virginia actually has a lot of Civil War battlefields. Mm-hmm. And so she said, well, where we're living, she starts to tell me the story about how one time she was upstairs of her house and she heard somebody walking around and talking downstairs, and she called down to her husband, and her husband was down in the garage. And so she went down thinking that the husband was actually on the lower floor where the kitchen and the living room was, but he was down in the garage. And so she went downstairs and she's like, what? So she called down to her husband. She's like, were you over at blah, blah? And he's like, no, I wasn't over there. I've been in the garage the whole time. So it happened several times. And she realized that there was probably a spirit of some sort in their house. Mm-hmm. And so as she was sharing the story with me, I said, well, it may be that, because this is the case in a lot of places around here, people's homes are on battlefields, quite literally old battlefields. I said, well, here's what we're going to do. So we did a little bit of a clearing ceremony for her house in this session. And she went home and she emailed me the next day. She said, Linda, first of all, I just want to tell you, as soon as I got off the table, my foot felt better. And I hadn't been able to walk on my foot for the last week. Not only has it continued, but I went home and I felt so much lighter in my own home. I was running up and down the steps, which I haven't been able to do for a couple of weeks. And there's something that's been cleared in our home as well. And then she shared with me that a few weeks later that the voice and the presence that she felt earlier was gone.
Oh, that's excellent. And that was remotely. You didn't go to the home.
Correct. She was just describing her home. She described sort of what the physical sensation was, and I tapped into it. And I got the sense that it was a Civil War, someone who had died in the Civil War, a Civil War soldier. And I said, you need to leave. You need to go into the light. So I did a little ceremony where I showed them, where the light was, and I had them walk up a set of stairs and go into the light, and it was all clear after that.
I love that.
I do a lot of clearing with people. A lot of times when I get people, I use a massage table. So when I get people up on the table and I'm doing some work with them, I will very much either see or feel a dark area where I know there's something going on. And that's what I'll clear, release that dark energy, send it to the light. But I often will sometimes get shown a hatchet or a knife or a tomahawk or something that they've been stabbed with in the heart or in the side or someplace. And then as I, again, sort of energetically, psychically, shamanically, whatever word you want to use, go in and pull that out, I can then go in and heal that old wound of a past lifetime. And that often people experience an openness or a releasing or a clearing, or they just, say that they feel better, they can breathe better. In some way, they feel a physical shift from having done that kind of work.
Yeah, that to a listener might seem kind of odd to think about weapon embedded in someone. I had an interesting experience when I did a reading for someone and identified a particular area of the globe and said that they would have been massacred in a past life. It was actually her and her cat. because we don't think about animals having past lives with us, but some have. And she said that a healer had told her that she had a sword from that area embedded in her auric field and had taken it out. That's again that sort of confirmation by group consensus that there are real things that are going on. So when you're finding that these are injuries either symbolized or actual that existed in their past lives and are affecting us, we are continual beings. We don't just stop and start at the beginning and end of life.
Yeah, I've done a lot of clearing of past life injury, past life trauma. For instance, just the other week I was working with a woman who was having some stuff going on within her family, and I definitely saw a past life where she had been part of a native tribe or village or group of some sort and had left to do something, and when she came back, everybody in her village was decimated. What she was experiencing with some of the family dynamics was this incredible sense of grief and loss. And I said, well, I definitely saw in this work that we did, your son was here, your husband was here, and I described it. And I said, what you've experienced is that you have lost them in another lifetime. And that sensation is still carrying over with you in this lifetime. I said, but the healing work that we did just now should help with that so that you know that that lifetime is done and gone. You don't have to experience it in this lifetime. And even as I was doing that with her, I very much saw her in the spirit realm reconnect with some of the other members of that village or that tribe. There was just this joyful reunion. Oh. That was what had happened in the healing session. So in the debrief, as I was describing what I saw, she was saying, yeah, it's funny, I just feel so much lighter, like this grief has just been lifted from me. It's really cool doing this work with you.
It is cool. It is. I love the experiences that you've shared, and thank you so much. We're coming up toward the end of the show, but I wanted to ask you, does someone have to be completely well or fairly cognizant to receive healing? Would this work with someone maybe with autism or someone who's in a coma?
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. I wish I had more time to tell you about the story about the healing work.
You'll have to come back.
The first thing of all of this is it's all about intention, and that if you have an intention to heal, you can. That's the first and foremost thing. And based on that, or building on that, as I always describe this with people, it's about free will. Free will always prevails. I won't do anything to anybody if there's not free will given, right?
Oh, yes.
They open up to receive it, they will be able to receive it. So that's just kind of the first thing about that one. So let me just share with you really briefly about some work that I did with the mother of an autistic child. And again, this would be a much longer story. We can maybe delve into it later.
I want to let you know we are right up on the hour. So would you come back and we'll share maybe healing stories?
Yes, more healing
stories. Okay, then we will do so. I'll get you scheduled. And thank you, Linda J. Ferguson, for joining us today. Author, shamanic healer, life coach, excellent person overall, lindajferguson.com. Past episodes on my show, mediumtracylockwood.com. And we'll see you next week for a view of life from a medium's perspective. And remember, it is never inappropriate to be kind, and without integrity, we have nothing. See you next week.